So Eric Metaxas said on Twitter, let me find it. Metaxas has really come around in recent years. He took some shots at Pulpit and Pin, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. But since then has actually tweeted our stuff a few times. Um, and I wrote about this at the Rolex of Polemics blogs. Dear Outrage Mob, yes, it's okay to call Jesus white. Calm down. He said on Twitter, Jesus was white. Did he have white privilege, even though he was entirely without sin? Is the United Methodist Church covering that? I think it could be important. And he was subtweeting Neil Shinvey. Is that how he says, say his name? Neil presents himself as an expert in critical race theory, and he says, and he knows some things. He says the United Methodist Church has enlisted Robin DiAngelo to produce a series of videos on deconstructing white privilege. And Eric tweets this, and he says, among other things, Jesus was white. And then the internet broke because Beth Moore shrieked. And when she shrieks, it shakes the foundations. It broke. People flipped out. What color was Jesus? Well, first of all, when Metaxas says Jesus is white, or if you hear someone else say that, that does not imply that Jesus is Caucasian. I mean, Metaxas is a relatively educated person. He wouldn't have assumed such or was implying such. Nobody is saying that Jesus hailed from Northern Europe. Metaxas was not using the term to imply that Jesus was an Anglo-Saxon. Jesus is Semitic. Yeah, I say is because he still has his flesh. Like he raised from the dead, he still has flesh. Jesus is Jewish, right? Historically, I hate to break it to you critical race theorists out there, but Jews have been considered either white or olive skinned since, well, like long before Christ was incarnate. Jews were called white, especially in comparison to others. Like, they're right above the northern tip of Africa, right? Compared to, say, Moses' Cushite wife, he's white. Now, whether or not Jews are classified as white is complicated, because what it means to be white, thanks to critical race theory, has become contorted over time. It has a negative connotation. So when people hear Jesus is white, when they think of whiteness, they think of sin and oppression, of other ethnic groups and privilege. Well, here's the thing. The term olive-skinned is used to refer to the Jewish people, and it refers to those who are on the human skin color spectrum. It's also called the Fitzpatrick scale, and the type 3 range of that scale. And there are 6 ranges, and the type 1, or excuse me, 6 types. Type 1 is Jim Gaffigan, okay? People who, if they go into the sun, burst into flames. Type 2 are people who burn most of the time, not necessarily all of the time. Take my wife, for example. Type 3 would be those who can get a tan. They'll have tan lines. They'll get darker if they're out in the sun. Type 4 are those who they don't hardly burn. It's really hard to get a burn, and it's also a little bit harder to get a tan. They don't burn. They don't tan. They get kind of a golden glow. All right. Type 5 is what we would call brown people who can have skin agitation in the sun but don't get burned hardly at all. And then there's type 6, which would be, who we would call black folks, who they neither one. They don't really tan. They don't really get burned. I didn't think this up. This was a scientist who thought up this dumb thing, the Fitzpatrick scale. Well, Jim, did I say Jim? I was thinking of Jim Gaffigan again. Jesus, being olive-skinned, that's a designation under type 3, which is what most Americans are, type 2 or type 3. We're darker than, most of our friends over in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, for example, but we're lighter skinned than, say, Pancho Villa, right? And so we're right in the middle, right? Like right where olive-skinned people, traditionally Jews, would be on this spectrum. Now, let me ask you a question. When you think of a Jewish person, how would you describe their skin color? Mark Zuckerberg, would you consider him a brown-skinned person? or black? Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Gal Gadot, I think that's Superwoman, uh, Joan Rivers, Natalie Portman, Seth Rogen. Yeah, he's like, you look at him and you're like, he's Jewish, right? But he's really white. So is it that absurd to call Jesus white? But who cares? Like, the whole thing about Jesus is he was is the Son of Man. He represents all mankind, people from every tribe, every tongue, every nation. He is our representative. Before Christ, your father is Adam. He's your head. After Christ, if you're in Christ, if you've been born again, Jesus is your head. He's the representative of believing humanity. And if you're in Christ, well, your head is a man whose body happens to be Jewish, but he also has a divine nature. He is in fact God. That part of his deity is not tied to genetic markers. So who cares? What saves us is that his blood, like ours, is red, and it bled. It was shed. Not his skin color. Who cares? Why does it matter? Metaxas was just trying to make a point. Like, how much privilege did he have? With all of his humiliation that he had to suffer. And these people, he's not white. What's wrong with you? He's not white. How dare you say that? Why is that? That's because James Cone invented something called black liberation theology that insists Jesus is black. And it's akin to liberation theology of South America that says Jesus identifies with the poor and the downtrodden, never the rich, always the oppressed, never the, quote, oppressor, which is a Marxist construct to begin with. The oppressed and the oppressor. You got to pick one, and you are who your group says you are. Jesus identifies. Now, if you would have said Jesus was black, or if Metaxas would have said Jesus is black, Jesus is brown, Beth Moore wouldn't have cared. Jesus was not brown. Jesus was not black. Jesus was an olive-skinned Semitic Jew who would not have had blonde hair or blue eyes. Here's what's happened. We got, I think 20 years ago or so, we as Christians in America, I think, woke up to the reality. Jesus is not like a 14th century Italian man. Jesus does not have, likely, blonde hair, although there are some Jews with blonde hair. Probably doesn't have blonde hair, or certainly blue eyes or green eyes. He does not look like the pictures that we have of him. We've come to that conclusion. But now we've overcorrected the wheel and have adopted a black Jesus or a brown Jesus. How about this? Maybe there's some wisdom in God's judgment. I'm just saying, maybe. I don't know. I haven't fully thought it out. Maybe there's some judgment or there's some wisdom in God's judgment in choosing someone that is in the middle. But he's not black. He's not brown. And let me be the first to say, it wouldn't matter if he was, so long as he was of the seed of woman and in the line of David. So long as he's fulfilling biblical prophecy by his patronage, no, that's not the right word, by his parentage, by his patriarchal roots, by his lineage, it wouldn't matter one iota. But it's not white supremacists who are insisting on a skin color for Christ. It's the black nationalists that are throwing a fit over this, as though Eric Metaxas said Jesus was sinful. So depending upon the, quote, scientific scale that is now widely used throughout the world to determine the skin color of people, according to that, Jesus is definitely more white than he is not. But this is like arguing over whether or not that color is ecru or eggshell. It doesn't matter. How dumb are we that we're arguing about the color of Christ as though it matters? Would you love Jesus less if he was like Jim Gaffigan white? Would you love him less if he was like, Kofi Adu Bohin black? Would you love him less if he was Speedy Gonzalez Brown? He was kind of tan, but would you love him less if he was of a different? What? How about this? Would he love you less? We're like kids arguing about the hue or the shade of Crayolas in the box. We have to grow up. So if you want to call Jesus white, there's an argument to be made. Well, he's white, but he's not Caucasian. We got to clear. Yeah, right. We all get that. That's fine. Whatever. I think Jesus was brown. Well, okay. I think it's a little bit more type 3 on the Fitzpatrick scale than type 4 or 5 or 6. Who cares? None of it matters. None of it.